Okay guys, so today's video is actually going to be part 1 of 2, in which we discuss builds that are actually going to be changing going into Shadowkeep, and what builds to be looking out for and what to bring when the next season launches. Now the reason why this is part 1 of 2, Sandbox details revolving around exotic armor pieces have not been revealed to us yet. Hopefully that happens this Thursday with the TWAB, but it's also a possibility though that we won't see the patch notes to that for maybe another week. Now some of the builds that we're going to go over today were actually builds we previously covered but weren't necessarily lethal in the current sandbox. Some of them we know for sure are going to be much better in the next sandbox due to some of the video clips inside of yesterday's Vidoc. Others are actually getting some indirect love due to some exotic weapon changes. So without further ado guys, let's count down 4 builds that you should be looking out for going into Shadowkeep. And again, I cannot stress this enough. This is not the final video to this. I've got so many builds from this year that are obviously going to be great even in the next sandbox, but I gotta make sure until after patch notes for exotic armor pieces go live that they are still gonna be worth using before we make a video on them. These are just the ones we know for sure are gonna be good in the next sandbox. Alright, moving on. First up, we have a build that we covered all the way back in Forsaken, Way of 1,000 Reloads. This took the powers of a hunter exotic called a Hamkara Grass, and combine it with either the Blade Barrage subclass or Spectral Blades. Either of those subclasses will work here, as essentially we take advantage of the exotic perk Nightmare Fuel. Dealing melee damage reloads your currently equipped weapon. Now at the time of a Way of 1,000 Reloads, this wasn't a necessary build. We had things like Lunafaction Boots, Rally Barricades, but with the nerf coming to those things, this exotic has just now rose to the top in terms of like most desired exotics. Like if you're looking to still use weapons like Mountaintop, that is a single shotgun, look no further because Hamkara and Nightmare Fuel has got you covered. Essentially, if you throw your melee out, which is either your smoke there found on Spectral Blades or your knife trick found on Blade Barrage's subclass, both of these melees apply a damage over time effect. Each damage over time effect though counts as a melee, at least in the eyes of Nightmare Fuel, thus resulting in your weapon constantly reloading itself, and once it stops proccing, simply tumbling on the ground with Gambler's Dodge will result in your melee coming back to you, and all you have to do is just rinse and repeat. And there's so many things, especially found on the Blade Barrage tree, that just synergizes so well with this build. Destroying targets that are already hit by Knife Trick recharges your melee even faster, and on top of that, while your enemies are burning, your dodge ability also recharges faster. It was as if this subclass was meant for this exotic. But even on Spectral Blades, you've got Corrosive Smoke, which actually deals damage over time, and on top of that, I feel like it actually deals damage over time even longer than something like Knife Trick, thus allowing you to get more reloads in. And of course, if you want to proc something like Flawless Execution and then proceed to proc Shattering Strike, voila, now you got a debuff to go along with whatever weapon you're auto reloading. This exotic could potentially be nerfed because it's so good right now currently for people that still want to stay with the current top tier DPS weapons. It is very possible this will be nerfed. I think many of the players inside the PvE community have already asked for a nerf, although Bungie, I believe, has not said anything. And if they do not proceed to nerf this, hands down, yes, this exotic paired with these subclasses are probably going to be the way to go for all day one raid teams. Moving on, we have Vesper of Radius combined with pretty much any Stormcaller tree. Now some of these Stormcaller trees I feel like synergize better here, but before we get too deep, Vesper appears to be getting a very nice buff going into Shadowkeep, as we saw it in the Vidoc. You see guys, Vesper comes with the perk Planetary Torrent. Rifts release an arc shockwave when cast. Rift energy also recharges faster when you are surrounded by enemies. And seeing the gameplay from the Vidoc yesterday, not only does it seem like it's going to get a buff there in lethality, but it also appears to get a buff there in radius. So it could be a double whammy. And in something like a horde mode, where enemies are constantly collapsing on you, dropping a rift over and over again just to keep you and your team alive is something you're probably going to be doing anyways. Might as well wipe out a bunch of enemies. But on top of that, considering that everything is shifting with Armor 2.0, Rift recharge rate should be extremely fast. But this is where we start to move into the Stormcaller subclass trees, as they begin to synergize beautifully with this exotic. First up, you can either rock Bottom Tree, which of course grants you and your teammates an Arc Soul. And again, the more you're around your teammates, the faster your Rift charges back, as you'll be taking advantage of the perk Electrostatic Surge. Now that sounds beautiful, but really I think it synergizes the best there with Middle Tree Stormcaller, as getting kills, even with the shockwave damage there on Vesper, can spawn things like Ionic Traces, which of course grants you ability energy for everything. And depending on how large that radius actually is, I would be interested to see how it pairs with Top Tree Stormcaller and something like Arc Web. Like, I'm not even sure if Arc Web would actually activate with something like Vesper. I haven't really tested it out extensively with Top Tree Stormcaller, but if it could, boom, Stormcallers. You got another way to wipe out teams. And depending on certain situations in PvP, this exotic has never been a top tier one for PvP, or even for PvE for that matter. But for those situations where a Warlock runs around the corner and he proceeds to pop his Rift to sit there and incubate himself, lo and behold, that shotgunner with one-eye mask coming around the corner to kill you in your Rift will now get KO'd before he can get a shot off. Could be stupid, man. I could see some team wipes occurring on control points if a Warlock somehow floofs over the top, drops down and pops a Rift. Yeah, should be pretty nasty. Moving on to our next build. This one is actually getting an indirect buff. And really, there's no other name for it than just the Way of the Titan. And that is Axiom War Rig with Sweet, Sweet Business. You see, Sweet Business is getting all of these buffs right here. Not only is it getting a ginormous jump there in magazine size, but it's also getting a buff inside of PvE as well as PvP. And the weapon will automatically reload ammo when walking over ammo bricks. Combine that with the power of Axiom War Rig with auto-loading Link, you should never have to worry about reloading again in your life. It's just constant rain of destruction. This is about the most Titan thing you can do. Sure, this setup really loses the element of surprise, but that's not the point. Way of the Titan is about giving away your position. On a real note though, Sweet Business is about to get disgusting, especially in PvP. Like, I know I'm showing all my gameplay in PvE, which is so much fun, but inside of PvP, this buff here in damage is really going to change the game here for Sweet Business. And I highly suggest for those that have not done the catalyst, it's dropping randomly from Crucible. I don't know if it's dropping for anything else, but it dropped randomly here recently inside of a Crucible game, and it was just a quick play game. This of course reduces the flinch, which no Titan has time for. So if you're a Titan main and you haven't seen this build yet, get acquainted. This is what separates the men from the boys, all right? And come October 1st, this setup right here is exactly what I'm taking to the moon. Moving on to actually our final build today, which is another Titan build, but believe me, it's gonna be really good come next season. And that is of course Top Tree Sentinel with Weapons of Light and Helm of Saint 14. Now, Helm of Saint 14, I gained a new appreciation of Bubble and this exotic when I did the 2-man raid event here recently. Ideally, in these 2-man raid events, they want you to get on a dress and play as a Warlock. I told Fammy I don't swing that way. Unfortunately for me, he allowed me to stay on my Titan class, which of course allows our Ward of Dawn here with Starless Night to grant us an overshield. Now, this overshield is nice, but the major benefit will be of course Weapons of Light next season, which will give us a whopping 35% there in weapon damage. Now, the weapon bonus damage that we're gonna get is extremely nice, but it won't matter if every time your fire team steps out of the bubble, they die instantly. We've seen it many times before, man, especially from like Hive boomers. I can't tell you how many times I would pop a bubble at like Crota's Inn to just have everyone that stepped out of it get boomered to death. So Helm of Saint 14, guys, an exotic 100% worth using. And we're not even getting into the fact that it blinds enemies that step into it. Like, that's great, but purely for just keeping your team alive. On top of also slapping on the best weapon damage buff that will be present next season. This is 100% a build I feel like every Titan should be using in in-game activities. Well, guys, those are our builds. And again, I want to just throw this in there. This is just part 1. Part 2 will hopefully be out this week once we get an idea of what our exotic armor pieces are going to be looking like next season. I'm actually on my way to Bungie right now. I'm almost certain we're going to be playing in the Shadowkeep Sandbox. Hopefully we'll be able to take exotics and drag them in there and test them out for ourselves. Regardless though, guys, as soon as we get information on all of those things, we'll have part 2 ready. Today's builds are essentially just builds that we know for sure are going to be affected in the next Sandbox. And if for like some reason no exotic armor pieces outside of what we talked about in today's video is being affected, we're just honestly just gonna go through our previous builds this past year and just like, I don't know, pick the best 7. A little bit of juju on that beat. So Swatch Charge, Insurmountable King, maybe even throw some Chromatic Huckleberry in there. I'm almost certain all of these builds are still gonna be viable, but hopefully we'll have some patch notes in front of us to know for sure. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.